Hello everybody, I'm Nora Burrows. My sewing has been put on hold for a little while due to a couple of wrist injuries that I'll tell you about. But on a happy note, I bought a quilt, an antique quilt. I'm going to show you that and tell you a little bit about it. I'm super excited for that. But in terms of these wrists, what I think happened, and I have taken the past week and really done almost no sewing. I did do a little bit, but really made sure to keep my wrists stable and take it easy. I've been icing them 3 times a day. And then last night I even heated them with a heating pad after I iced them, and that felt really good. So they do feel like they're on the mend, but I have to still be careful. So I'm only doing a little bit of sewing every day, and then I've almost completely stopped my hand sewing. For a full week, I completely stopped my hand sewing, which is hard for me because every morning for a very long time now, I do a little bit of hand sewing in the morning. I watch YouTube on my phone. I put my phone on the arm of the couch and watch the YouTube videos in the morning while I do my hand sewing for about a half hour, and then I have my breakfast, and it's a great way to start the day. So I haven't been doing that. Instead, I've been reading while icing my wrists, which is challenging because turning the pages while you're icing your wrists is not great. And then I frequently in the evening do hand sewing, depending how tired I am at the end of the day. Well, my husband and I watch a movie or watch TV. I'll do hand sewing in the evening, but I haven't done any of that for over a week. No hand sewing in the morning or the evening, and then this morning is the first time I did some hand sewing in the morning, and it felt okay, but I have to be careful. So nothing really dramatic or specific happened, but my wrists started hurting me, both of them, and I do think I know what happened. I did some research on exactly the point. Here, I'll take these wristbands off. These are great. I got these on Amazon. It came in a pack of 2, and they feel so good. Even like outside of the wrist injury, I kind of feel that after this heals, when I'm doing my sewing, I might wear these sometimes because it really stabilizes the wrist and the pressure feels good. But right about here, I was feeling a lot of pain, first in my right wrist, my dominant wrist, and then very soon after my left wrist as well. And I think the situation, so I did a bunch of research. I was like, why is this happening? I actually thought it was the hand sewing that was causing it. And I was really upset about that because I was like, that's like what I do. But I actually think what it is I did a bunch of research on that point. I think it's, it has to do with swelling and these things, and they say you have to rest it for a certain amount of time, but I think what caused it is not the hand sewing, but I have been running every morning for a couple years now. In the spring, summer, and fall I run, and then in the winter I don't, but I run almost every day, between, I'd say, 5 and 7 days a week I'll run. Typically I'll run every single day of the week. And what I had started doing a couple years ago is running with 1-pound weights. And you're killing 2 birds with 1 stone. I would say I highly recommend it, but now I can't really say that anymore. So I was running with these 1-pound weights, and it was great. And so then this year when spring came, I was running with my 1-pound weights, and I quickly upped it to 2-pound weights, which felt great. And the workout felt fantastic. And I don't run far, I only run 1.6 miles. So every morning, 1.6 miles with my 2-pound weights, and I felt like that was a really healthy way to start the day. Then I came back and I started my hand sewing, and then I had my breakfast. Well, I think when I was doing my research, it said that this injury is caused by a motion similar to hammering. So if you think of like holding a hammer and hammering, that's the injury. So when I thought about that motion, it didn't seem so much like the hand sewing to me, which does kind of have that same feeling, but I think it was holding the weights, which is similar to holding the hammer, right? And then running back and forth with the weights. That's what I think happened. I'm hoping it's not the hand sewing. I'm hoping it's the weights. So they said, Google, being they, said to stop doing whatever that is you were doing for 6 to 8 weeks, which is not a problem. I'm just gonna stop using the weights forever. I'll continue to run, but just not with weights. Then I will not stop the hand sewing. And it's not only the hand sewing, but it's also the rotary cutting. So the actual sewing part of putting fabric through a machine is fine, because I can leave my hands kind of flat like this and just feed it through the machine. So that's fine. But the rotary cutting with the pressure, really I can feel that in the wrist quite a bit. So I have to be really careful with the rotary cutting, and then also the hand sewing as well. So I'm not going to completely stop that for 6 to 8 weeks, but I have to slow it down, unfortunately. It's especially unfortunate for many reasons. But the fact that I have this festival coming up that I told you all about that I'm trying to make stuff for, I don't really want to be slowed down. I gotta speed up, but I can't. I have to slow down because this is important. So that's that, but I do have this quilt to show you, so let me tell you about it. I have a little antique store near me that I haven't been to in a very long time. I almost never go in it because it used to be very, very small and they didn't really have anything fabric-wise, so on and so forth. But I happen to be in the building that little antique store is in. I happened to be in there the other day, and I noticed that they moved across the hall to a much, much bigger space. And the bigger space has like multiple rooms of antique-y things. So I said, let me go in and see if there's, you know, any like vintage fabric. So I went in, they didn't really have any vintage fabric, but I saw near the cash register some antique quilts. I saw some crazy quilts and some like strip quilts that were done in like velvets and silks and things like that, older quilts. Most of them dated on the tag, not dated on the quilt. So I said, I was actually with my mom, and I was very enthusiastic about these, and she said, oh, well, they also have some quilts, like if you go farther back. So I went farther back and I turned the corner, and there were a ton of quilts. I mean, there was a lot. There was probably like at least 8 to 10, maybe even 12 quilts, and not all of them were so desirable, but there were a couple that were pretty amazing. And one of them was a signature quilt that I'm gonna show you, is the one I bought. I bought it for $250. Tell you about that in a minute. But the signature quilt I found to be particularly wonderful. The quilt is in pretty good shape, but the signature part, the fact that you can add provenance to this quilt, and it has, it not only has the signatures, but it has the specific day, the dates are on the quilt blocks down to the day, like March 3rd, you know, 1970. So the blocks were made in 1877 and 1878. It makes me think, like, what was happening in the world? The quilt was made, so what I'm trying to say here is that the blocks not only included the name and then the date, but also the city and state. So they're all from Massachusetts, but they're in different cities, different towns in Massachusetts. So it makes me think, like, what was happening in Massachusetts in like 1977 and 1978? And I've been, you know, since I got this quilt last week, like I stumbled upon a couple things that were right around that time period, and it like makes me reference the quilt. Anyway, so I was with my mom and my husband in this antique store looking at these quilts, and I really don't want to buy a lot of antique quilts because I make so many quilts that they take up a lot of space. So for me to come to my husband and say like, oh, I'm gonna buy an antique quilt now, he doesn't care so much, you know, what I buy or don't buy, but like he does care about taking up space. He's a very tidy person, and I am not a tidy person. So, you know, he likes, you know, my quilts, and I have them laid out specifically on the guest bed, and they're layered up so they don't take up a lot of space. But like bringing in bulky, you know, quilts are not small. They're not like little trinkets. They're pretty big. So to bring quilts, you know, that I did not make into our house, I think is not his favorite thing. But, you know, I'm looking at all these antique quilts, and I just love so many of them. Like, I love them all for many reasons, but there were some in particular that were pretty amazing. But this one with the dates, the signature quilt, I was just like, that quilt is coming home with me. I am buying that quilt. So I said to my husband, I was like, explained, my husband knows a lot about quilts. So I explained to him, you know, why this was an important quilt, why, you know, I was going to buy it, so on and so forth. And he was like, that's fine. And it was priced at $250, I think, or was it $275? I think it was $250. Yes, it was it's priced at $250, and he said, that's fine, but we're gonna negotiate. And he's a lawyer, and so he really enjoys the negotiation process, whereas I am like, I wanna have nothing to do with that. But at first I was like, okay, well, I don't wanna negotiate, but if you wanna negotiate, fine. And then I had this like moment of thinking, and I was like, no, I don't want you to negotiate. I just wanna pay the full price, because this was the feeling that I had, and I think it's a little bit right. Quilts are the great American craft, and you can get into this whole thing about craft versus art, which I'm not talking about right now, but in my mind, and yes, quilts are very artistic, et cetera, but in my mind, quilts are the great American art, and yet they're so undervalued. You look at all of these antique auctions and things like this, and things that are, you know, items that are bid for so high, and people go into antique stores and spend so much money on these antique items, and quilts they are never priced high. They're never purchased for very much. They're never really appreciated, in my opinion, for the historic importance that they hold. And so I didn't want to be part of bringing that price down, to start negotiating, to say, oh, this quilt, this is what I'm willing to pay for this quilt, less than what they're asking. I want to pay what the quilt is worth. And I think that the quilt is worth much, much more. Do I think that it's like worth more, meaning like people in the country are going to pay more than, you know, $250 for this quilt? No, I think it was priced fairly. But do I think it's worth significantly more? Yes, I think that quilts should be, you know, priced, antique and vintage quilts should be priced, you know, far, far more than they are. So I said, no, we're not only am I going to bring home this quilt, but we're also going to pay full price for it. So he was like, fine, whatever. Anyway, so I bought the quilt. Let me show it to you. Here's the quilt. It's, you know, this really traditional quilt block pattern that you see in a lot of these signature quilts that, you know, having this middle square really aids in the ability to do the signatures. Let me bring you in and get a closer look so that you can see the sashing. I don't know exactly how big it is. Let me hold it up and you can see me holding it, and that will give you a good sense of how big it is. Okay, here it is. So it's touching the floor here. So it's a little bit taller than me, if that gives you any sense. You know, a good throw size, I would say. But here it is. Let me give you a closer look at some of these fabrics and signatures. It's really, really spectacular. There are some condition issues, not severe, but here and there, you know, and some of the signatures have faded to the point that you can't read them anymore. In addition, the ties over time are going to be less stable than if it was, you know, actually quilted, and that does bring the value down as well. You know, if this was hand quilted, that would be typically more desirable than the tying. You can see some of, you know, the problems. Here's a little bit of a rip, and here the signature you can't read really very well anymore. Let's see if I can find, here's a couple signatures that you can. Lottie Draper from East Brookfield, March 14th, 1877. So these blocks are all from 1877 and 1878. But I love this sashing that the quilt maker chose to use. It's hard to see on video. You know, you can obviously see that this is a brown stripe, but then in between the dark brown, it's almost this olivey color. Here's another stain here that you can see. So there's just these little stains and little rips. This person, instead of signing it, used a stamp. It looks like it says NC Reed. Here's another stamped one. Some of these fabrics are really just gorgeous, like this one here. You know, I love this fabric here. So many of them, really all of them, and how they paired, you know, this with the pinstripe is great. Another fantastic fabric with the pinstripe. This person is Mrs. Patrick Kelly. So you get the idea. I hope you enjoyed seeing my new quilt. I do love it. I need to figure out what to do with it. It's not gonna live in a closet. I feel very strongly about the fact that these quilts should be loved and used, and I understand the perspective about wanting to keep them for generations to come and storing them in tissue-free acid-free tissue paper. You know, to preserve them, but the quilts don't want to be preserved. Quilts want to be used. The physicality of them is what makes them so special, in my opinion. I realize it's a very controversial issue. So I do want to use this quilt. Now, not overly use it, right? It wouldn't be a quilt that I would use frequently, let's say, because we all know that the more you use the quilt, the more it gets worn more quickly. This quilt is gonna get worn with me because I'm gonna use it. I just need to use it sparingly, and I need to figure out where it's gonna live. I wanna keep it out of the sun, but I wanna take care of it, but I also wanna use it. So I need to figure out what that looks like for me. Speaking of using quilts, I have kind of a funny story that just happened yesterday that just occurred to me. So my husband's great-grandmother made a Depression era quilt. I showed it in some video a while ago, but it is a grandmother's flower garden, and it does live on our couch. Now it's not this quilt here, but there's a couch further over this way. It's like you can see a little bit of the couch right there. So this couch here, it makes kind of like an L if you go this way, and then this way makes an L. Anyway, on that couch lives my husband's great-grandmother's flower garden Depression era quilt. It was made around like the 1940s. And we just got that last year at some point, and it's been living on that couch. Now, I don't sit on that couch all that frequently. I sit on the one with this quilt here facing the TV. As you can see, the TV is right there. Anyway, last night, for whatever reason, I grabbed the grandmother's flower garden quilt. It's a pretty big quilt. It's hefty, and I just put it on top of myself, and I was feeling so cozy, and I started to not feel so great. I was like, I don't know, like maybe I'm getting sick. What's going on? And so hours are passing because we had a big movie night last night, so we watched movie and TV, and we were on that couch. So finally, I'm getting sniffly just thinking about it. So finally, I'm like, I feel like I'm having an allergic reaction. Like my eyes are itchy, and I finally said, I feel like I'm holding a cat. And as soon as I said that, I looked down and I realized that I was sitting under this blanket that had been stored in Derek's grandmother's house for a gazillion years, and she is a cat person with cat hair all over her house. Whenever I go and visit them, I have like visit her, I have drastic allergic reactions. And so I was sitting under this cat quilt with cat allergies, and I was just like, ah! So evidently, just leaving it out in your house is not the same as airing it out. I need to go like air it out. I need to like put it on a clothesline outside and like shake it out and shake out the cat dander. But it was kind of funny because I was feeling so cozy and emotionally attached to the quilt and loving that I was sitting under a Depression era quilt. And then I was like, get it off, get it off. Anyway, thank you for joining me. Don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you next time.